News broke about a month ago that DC had hired Mariko Tamaki to take over as writer for Wonder Woman. The news was met with some skepticism, as Mariko Tamaki was probably best known for She-Hulk in recent times, that was kind of universally panned by a lot of readers. There are certainly fans of it, but it was polarizing, to say the least. And fans wondered, why is she now getting brought in to do Wonder Woman, especially at a time when Wonder Woman's comic is going to have an elevated profile with the movie? Well, let's look at Tamaki and kind of the practice of hiring writers who have a more indie flavor into the superhero genre. Hey everybody, this is Perch. A lot there's been plenty of videos about Mariko Tamaki. I was a guest on the Thinking Critical channel talking about the move when it was announced at the time. And so I don't want to spend this video talking about, is she good, is she not good as a writer. I think ultimately that's a matter of opinion. People are going to like what they like or dislike what they dislike. And there's no point in trying to convince somebody who likes or dislikes something that the opposite is true. People have their own opinions, and we should be comfortable with that. The more interesting part of the story, I think, that's been on my mind is Wonder Woman has an elevated profile with this summer, whenever the movie does actually come out, because of the 1984 movie, and it's definitely billed as a summer superhero blockbuster. It's not pretending to be a kind of thoughtful psychological drama. That's not to say it's not well made. That's not to say it won't be a thought provoking movie in its own way, but it's an action film. It's a comic book action film, and it stars, I think, probably the character at DC that's had the most success on the big screen in recent years, anyway. Of the DCEU getting it right, so to speak. The first Wonder Woman movie was pretty well regarded. I think a lot of people felt it was handled very well, and the DC made up for some of the missteps of Justice League and Man of Steel, and that they got the character right. And so there's a lot of high expectations going in for this film. Meanwhile, the comic book is there, and similarly to Black Panther, when the movie came out and had a big splash, and you had Ta-Nehisi Coates as the writer, taking the comic in I would say, a markedly different direction than the film. Yes, there was plenty about Wakanda in both products, the movie and the comic, but it tonally felt very, very different from the movie. And I've done other videos, and I'll be honest, I can't remember if it's been released yet or not, or if it's still in the backlog, of why is it that movies and comic books seem to diverge so much. But with the announcement of Tamaki on Wonder Woman, it seems almost certain that the comic book is going to have a different take. Now, we haven't seen the script, so anything can happen. I want to be fair about it. But reading a recent interview from Tamaki on Newsarama, we learned a little bit about her background. And one of the things that she brings is that she believes that pretty much every comic story is a coming of age story. All stories are coming of age stories, and she talks a lot about her work on Skim, which was one of her first titles, if not her first, that she did in 2008. It's kind of weird to think of 2008 as being a first piece of comic work. I'm old. That's just every now and then it's like, in this article, it talks about her finding her voice in 2014. It's like 6 years ago. You found your voice 6 years ago. I mean, everybody, of course, writers come up with anything, but that's just that's close. But she talks about how kind of her style of her big influences, Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, how it was really smart and kind of this indie feel of a comic book applied to big time superheroes. And then that combined with this, the vision of the creator and kind of this idea that you think about more the kind of the indie emotional tie to comics. And it's certainly a style that the editors and the big two seem to be wanting to court. There's a belief that the coming of age story, kind of the indie feel, kind of the angst of teenage drama and kind of the inner turmoil of a character is what the comics should be. And I think some of this is because the editors grew up on these comics and it's what they know as well. But it's like theater scripts, and Tamaki mentions this, that it's she writes like more in flavor of theater scripts rather than big budget movies, and so it's how she's thinking and how she's putting comics into play. She talks about wanting to do Catwoman because she'd like to kind of write a sneaky woman in a one piece and kind of get into kind of the head of these characters. But what's interesting about that is if you look at superhero books in particular, and you look into the past of when they were very successful, the comic wasn't really about getting into their heads. As much as Chris Claremont was been lauded for lots of words and in-depth storylines and very complex things, the comics that he wrote were a lot less introspective than you think. If you go back and read them now, you're kind of you'd be surprised how they read very much as a kind of an action movie, as a kind of superhero action movie. And I think that's also, by the way, part of the reason why films like the Avengers and X-Men and the different kind of really big successes out of the MCU largely took from storylines of 20, 30 years ago. They were easily translatable to 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 what movies are all about, and what gets them moving. So I read this and I see these interviews, and Tamaki is saying things that a lot of other creators have said the same. And they talk about their influences, and a lot of people cite the Matt Fraction Hawkeye as an influence in comics. And they talk about her works of Skim and This One Summer being kind of really powerful works that help form her style of writing. And then you go back and you look at either her X-23 or Wolverine, and you look at her She-Hulk. Although I think it was called Hulk this time around. I'm not trying to bash that comic, but this was the PTSD Hulk, and it had the reality show that was a cooking show, and kind of her struggling with her inner Hulk and so on. So it was her coming of age or coming to grips with her inner self. That was the comic. And again, like I said at the beginning, like it or hate it, I was not a fan of it, but I don't begrudge people who were. There are lots of people who want that kind of comic, or maybe. The challenge is, and as I've said before, I don't think those people who want that comic know that that comic exists, or they're not finding their way into the store to actually buy this comic. The numbers are very low. So I'm not discounting the fact that there are people who like coming of age stories, like this kind of psychological drama and introspection to comics. I think there are. I think there's a place for it. There's a place for indie films that can make money. But what you have is a very established run of comics that are more Hollywood based, more big budget based. I think people are still coming to Batman, Superman, X-Men, Wonder Woman, etc., expecting kind of big budget action. And the comic publishers are giving to them kind of indie introspection. And it's a mismatch. And it's not saying that one belongs and the other one doesn't. It's that the expectation of the readers have been built toward one thing, and you're offering the other. That I think also is the reason why you see some of the indie comics, particularly ones where people are putting their own skin in the game, their own funding, why they tend to connect with their audience a little bit better, because they're putting in their own funding. They know that if they spend their own money on a comic that doesn't connect with an audience, they lose all that money. And so I think there's an interesting dynamic there. And so I'm fascinated as I read these interviews with Tamaki and others. I mean, she sounds pleasant. I mean, nothing against her. A lot of people just ripped her endlessly, and they don't like the comics, and that's fine. But she's identifying, and I think she's speaking some truth in the sense that she's telling us exactly what it is she likes to do. She's talking about her influences. She's talking about the kind of comics she likes to write. She's talking about what gets her excited about characters and so on. So she's telling us what she's going to do, and then she's doing what she's saying. The challenge is what she does, is what she produces fit the characters? I mean, for Tamaki, sure. I mean, she's hired to do a job. She's doing the job she's hired to do, and on it goes. But from a publisher standpoint, from the editors on up, is this the right connection in order to make with your audience? And I think, have you missed a step? It feels like we went from big budget superhero film to kind of indie film. And there was nothing in between to kind of make sure that the audience was there or to basically connect the dots from one place to another to say, hey, we're going to transition to this new audience, or hey, we're going to open up this new market. It was just, surprise. You remember those big kind of George Perez, John Byrne action Wonder Woman comics? Well, now we've got introspection. And so I have no doubt that when Wonder Woman launches with Tamaki, it's going to be a very kind of introspection type title. I think it will look a lot like She-Hulk did. And when that is happening side by side with a, multi-$100 million budget Wonder Woman 1984 film that's kind of big on action and moments, do those two products fit together? By the way, the counter to this, as I've heard, is, well, the products don't have to fit together. You can have a lot of different things. And that's true, you can. But you have a core comic line, you have a core movie, and it feels like the Wonder Woman we're going to get in Death Metal, which is supposed to be a Wonder Woman-centric story, which is big on action, big on kind of huge moments, it feels like that one is going to be the one that people gravitate to more than, say, the actual title, Wonder Woman. And that seems off to me. And again, my personal opinion. This is not, I want to stress again, it's not me bashing Tamaki. It's not me saying she shouldn't write in comics and she has no business there and she's trash or any of the other stuff that is said. It's just posing the question of, I think I've read Skim. I have not read This One Summer. Skim was good. I mean, it was a good comic for what it was. It fit. I knew I was getting coming in. It was that comic, and it was fine. Um, so why apply a person who's really good at something to a title where it feels like it creates a conflict with the market you're going after? That's my question. What do you think? Leave me a comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification if you're so inclined to do that. Tell a friend. Hey, I'd love to have more people in here giving me opinions, good or bad, or whatever it is. Do you like these comics? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Do you feel like there's a confusion in the industry around this? Would love to hear your opinions on it. Follow me at Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.